Well, I've started earlier too. Yeah, so welcome guys, and all of those who are like unable to join the sessions. I completely understand, and I receive a couple of requests from the college going people as well, right? They might be having some sessions in the morning. Though usually from the past weeks, I was keeping the sessions around like 2 p.m. or like 1:30 p.m. like, so that the people can also join like once the sessions are over. So today was an odd period, right? I'm having a couple of commitments after 12:30 p.m. today. So like that is the only reason I kept the session earlier on. And no worries. So if anyone is not able to attend that session, just feel free to watch the recordings on the website. They are available. And if you have any confusion that where are the recordings, how to view that, just ping me. Just ping me on the number like which is being shared on the group itself. Okay. Because every time explaining everyone that the modules are available is quite difficult. Okay. So like any of you like who has some like specific concerns on modules, just feel free to tell me. Okay, on the chat. And also like text me on the other number, like which is posting a few of the messages on the group, right? Because that's the business contact number of the MMF and the company itself. So like any type of questions that you have, so that would be a much convenient way and a faster way to answer all your questions. It might happen that if you are texting on the personal number of mine, I might take a few time, right? A few hours to respond to you, right? Because I'm busy into some other work as well. So please like respond upon the other number, be it me or be it like anyone as my business associate or the manager would be responding on that number with all your questions and queries. And if you want to connect with me personally as well, just text on that number that I want to connect with so personally, then I'll be like more than happy to connect with you on that. And that's a faster mode of communication, I believe, to get your queries answered, because there can be some smaller queries or minute queries like which some other person might be able to handle, right? And you need not wait for me to answer upon that WhatsApp number. So that is the only concern that I think. Okay. So coming back to the session, the thing is in the previous session, we discussed about multiple aspects, right? We talked about multiple financial ratios. We talked about valuation ratios, and the few of the ratios are discussed in an overview manner as well, right? Like which have been discussed in depth in the modules. So please feel free to go back to the website and watch the modules, because the modules will be making you understand the concepts in a much easier manner, in a much better manner, right? So that is something that can be cleared out. So modules will really help you out in understanding at least the basic part to the intermediate part. Most of the advanced aspects have been included in those modules as well. And these sessions will be a carry on to make you understand such stuff practically and from a different perspective. So Devesh is asking CFA, FRM, CMA, which is better for finance. I always recommend CFA because like that is a general thing that might help you for everything, right? Like if you're going for a risk profile, a valuation profile, investment banking profile, CFA is something that encapsulate all. FRM is something that is being related or oriented towards just risk profiles, your risk analytics, your profiling, WAR. So all these. So if you are just oriented to build up a career into the risk analytics, or some profiles that tend to offer security analysis risk only, I can just name a few profiles if you want on a ping to you. So like FRM is just oriented towards one set of population, or the one set of people who are trying to build up a career into this field. Whereas CFA is something which is holistic. It encapsulates everything. So if a person who has done CFA, he can build up a career into any field in finance, which I believe. Okay. So that is something. So can we get our academic doubts cleared as well, like related to the topic discussion in the sessions? Yeah, I've told you earlier as well, like to everyone. So like if anyone has any kind of academic questions in any of the curriculums that you are doing in the undergraduation, UG, PG curriculums, feel free to text me on the new number on WhatsApp. I'll be more than happy to connect with you or like someone else from the team per se. Okay. Because like these sessions are meant exclusively for the IB training. But in case if you have any of the sessions, so that benefit is available to you as a part of this curriculum. So for that, we can schedule some separate sessions. Okay. And if you guys can come up as a group, like with one topic, that would be like much more feasible, because if like different people ask the same query, like one by one, it becomes quite difficult for me also to respond. Okay. So the best thing is if you guys can coordinate among each other and you have one subject and one particular topic. So maybe all the 60, 70 people like who are from that particular college can come together and we can join in as a separate session. So that's the most feasible way, and that's the most participant I can suggest. Though still, I have no problem in like replying you like individually as well, but that might take your time and my time also, right? Because the current world is built upon smart work and not hard work. Correct? Like if you guys agree. ठीक है, तो स्मार्ट वर्किंग में like सबका बेनिफिट एक साथ हो, so that's better. Like instead of like everyone pinging me like one after the another and me handling your concerns, I'm like more than happy to like assist you individually as well. But as a group, that will save time of yours and me also. Correct? So that is the thing. And again, as I always suggest, the competition should be replaced by cooperation, because sometimes what the people feel ki like हमारा doubt solve हो जाए and the other people should not benefit out of that. Because again, like MBA like is all about competition and the people are searching for jobs at the end. But if you guys can grow together and that can replace the competition from cooperation, that will really help you guys in future. So come together for doubts and queries, because ultimately we might be dependent upon each other in the near future, like once we enter into the job life. Correct? So हमने in the previous session we talked about job बोल रहा हूँ, we talked about the ratios and different things. Okay, so a few of the things that we need to understand, like whenever we are trying to analyze a business. Okay, so the quantitative aspect is one thing that we try to analyze, and जो भी like ratios में किसी को like कोई भी doubt है, just feel free to come back to me and ask me your concerns. I'll be more than happy to assist. So whatsoever the thing is, like whenever we are trying to understand a business, or whenever we are trying to understand a company, there are few modes that we need to understand. And what do we mean by modes? Modes is nothing but a competitive advantage that that particular company might have and the other companies might not have, right? So the simple definition of a moat is any kind of a competitive characteristics or a competitive advantage or a unique proposition, right? A USP of a company that that particular company has and the other companies might not have it already. Okay, and I'll be happy to answer all the questions at the end of a particular topic or at the end of the session per se. Okay, like just to avoid any kind of disturbance between the session. Okay, so questions अपने chat box में सब डालते रहो. Okay, like put hundreds and thousands of questions, no problem in that. Just put in the chat box and I'll be more than happy to assist you. Okay, the modes that we talked about. So whenever we're talking about a business now, just don't look only towards the financial ratios, and the valuation metric is something different, like which is being used to value a company. But if we talk about in general, we talk about the financial ratios for the company, right? When we are trying to gauge that performance. And those financial ratios, they tend to become an input, right, into those valuation ratios. I'll repeat my point. The financial ratios that we tend to calculate, those tend to become an input or a raw material towards calculating the valuation ratios. Correct? So for example, if you're talking about the price to earning ratio, so in that earning component, you have that EPS, right? So EPS is a financial ratio, but not a valuation ratio. And how is EPS being calculated? You have the profit after tax by the outstanding share. So all these things that we are using to calculate the valuation ratios, in 90% of the cases, the financial ratios become an input to calculate the valuation ratios, right? And all of the people like who have joined recently, who think that these things are getting a bit complicated and we aren't able to relate to the session in the previous week, feel free to watch the recording patiently, right? Because I understand the guys have come in to this curriculum this morning or the previous night, and they might not have time to watch the previous module. So not to worry about that, right? The sessions are very simple. Just watch the previous recordings and try to establish a link or relate the same to this session. Okay, and feel free to ask me any questions. Okay, because doubt window is always open for you guys. Okay, जो भी doubt है पूछो, like so that you guys can establish a link. So not to worry about that and not to hesitate. I completely understand your concerns. ठीक है. So mode के बारे में बात कर रहे थे. So that's a competitive advantage that the company has. So there can be like couple of modes. I've listed down a few of the modes and there can be some other modes as well in the market. But a few of the most popularly called modes, which the equity research analyst or the people who are researching about the company tend to talk about, is the number one is the network mode. Okay, so what happens in case of a network mode, as the name suggests network, it means the company has good network around, right? It might be like in establishing good networking relationship with customers, with suppliers. The people tend to rely or trust upon that particular company. And the company has a huge, good marketing team as well, sales team as well, right? And the marketing of that company is really strong. Though, if we talk about marketing, marketing is usually talked about a startup company, right? Or a new venture that comes into place. Because these companies need to market their products more, right? So like if we talk about Ola or we talk about a new startup company at that particular point of time, right? Be it like Paytm or Google Pay, not Google Pay, right? But the phone pay. So maybe like 10 years, 15 years down the line. So these were the initial startup companies. Now these companies have made their names in the market. But when a company is starting initially, that company like needs to establish a network mode. That company needs to market itself, its products, its management, what the company is offering and how the company is unique. right? But though when the company becomes established, a large cap company or maybe a mature company after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line, so that company need not market itself, right? The company needs to market just its products, but not its brand. Right, because like for example, if we talk about HUL and like HUL offers multiple brands like Horlicks, it tends to offer Pantene and like different shampoos and soaps. So it tends to market its soaps and products, right? But it doesn't market its brand, right? You might have seen nomads saying that HUL is a big company, like HUL offers these products. No, correct? Because HUL, ITC, Marico, like all these companies are mature companies, large cap companies, established companies. These companies need not market their brand, but these companies have to market their products, right? Some oiling product, कोई तेल market कर देंगे, right? So all these things they need to market, but they need not market their brand as a whole. Correct. So network effect, maybe in terms of startup companies. And the second effect is how broad and how much people know about your company. And that might come on account of networking. That might come on account of positive word of mouth. When people are using your products, they say, "Chalo, theek hai, like this company ka product is doing really good." And they might recommend it to the other people as well, right? So that is one thing. So all kind of networking which can be created through social media platforms, online modes, offline modes. So all these kinds of things is something that they tend to offer in case of a network mode. So if a company is really good in terms of the network effect, that company has a higher chance to prosper and become a mature company in not the near future, but at least 20 years, 30 years down the line, because people know about that product or a company, right? But this network effect is majorly used in case of the startup companies, the new age companies that have come into place. And I would really applaud a company called as Ola Electric, right? You might have heard about this company. It's in the news, IPOs, right? The company has recently offered like some amount of crores like to be raised in the market, right? The kind of though the company is like is still into losses, huge losses, right? At the time it achieves the profitability is still more, right? It might take like years and years to achieve the profitability. But the thing is, the way the founder of the company markets its product, its scooters, its bikes, right? That way is really fascinating because he's trying to create that network mode. He's trying to do the online marketing, the offline marketing. And again, that's the fourth largest, I would say, two-wheeler EV company in the entire globe on the basis of sales and revenues, right? If we talk about this Ola Electric. So the fourth largest in terms of revenue, in terms of two-wheeler vehicles globally. So that's a thing that it commands, right? And really people knew about it because people thought ki the company is into losses and why do you talk about it on a bigger platform? But the way he's marketing his company as the fourth largest company on the basis of the revenue in two-wheeler space. So that's remarkable. And that is something that creates a positive moat for the company, right? Yeah, losses, 347 crores, correct. So the number is approximately 347 crore, as my friend Devesh also said. So converting that loss of minus 347 crores to break even, that might take time. Okay, so networking is very important into this case. The second thing, if we talk about is the regulatory licenses. So what do we mean? See, like whenever we are establishing a business or running a business or operating our activities, right? We always need to have certain approvals from a regulatory authority. It can be SEBI, it can be RBI, it can be a specific department. Like for example, if I want to establish something, right? Maybe into a manufacturing business, right? Then I might need to take the specific approvals from the specific department under the government of India to get those specific licenses. Because whatever businesses we're trying to operate, you need a specific license, right? So for example, if I am running my business as motivational monetary fund does, I can't run my business until and unless I do not have the specific licenses or approvals from the government of India. Correct. So I have those specific licenses. I have my business plan. My company is registered under the Ministry of Finance, right? So all these things I need to take the licenses from, right? And similarly, the other companies who might be into the same industry or some other businesses, they have to take predefined approvals from those respective authorities to run their businesses. So that's the concept of regulatory licenses. But there are some businesses in which to obtain these kinds of these licenses or regulatory licenses is very difficult, right? There might be some industries like which are into the monopoly space or a duopoly space or an oligopoly state, where I mean where just one business or a one company is operating and that company is the leader, where two or three companies are operating. So duopoly is in the case like where two companies are operating, and this oligopoly is the state where like two or five companies are operating. And so there might be huge chunk of businesses into that particular space, be it two businesses, be it three businesses, and those are the number one, number two, and number three market leaders. And they do not want any kind of a small dolphin or a fish to come into the market because those are the big sharks, right? They always want to eat up those small fishes in the market or the pond, correct? They do not want the other businesses to come in and survive. So it's very difficult for those businesses ideally to obtain that license, right? So the classic example, as my friend Siddharth also said, Jio and Airtel, right? It's a duopoly. So if anyone wants to obtain a license in this telecom industry, it's very difficult for them, right? 99% chances are they won't get the license. So if a new player like me comes into place, or like for example, if Siddharth goes to the market and says कि telecom business मुझको start करना है, 99% of the cases में you won't get that license. Because again, there are those back-end approvals. The back-end politics is also there, right? All those kinds of government approvals are also there. They will say that Airtel and Jio are the two players, and they do not want that some other players should enter into the market, right? So that is one thing, right? Now there might be some cases if Adani wants to come up like with the telecom businesses, right? Then they might like allow that person because like he's at par with Mr. Ambani's or like with Airtel on like some other grounds, right? So the people like who have their name in the market, like who are the reals, I would say the big billionaires, not the trillionaires, but the billionaires in the market, they might get those approvals because they already have such kind of businesses being running, right? Some, not the telecom, but some other types of businesses. But a person like who has entered into the market and wants to establish just that telecom business, that person will not get a license. It's a duopoly, right? Like similarly, see, the most easier license like which people tend to get is into this educational industry. And because everyone, like most of the people are like getting their licenses, they're trying to run their online businesses, offline businesses, and they get that license, right? Because the competition is quite healthy into like into such space, and there's no kind of oligopoly or the duopoly into such space. Because mostly what happens, the big players who tend to come in the market, they get demolished as well, right? So Byju's is one such example, right? Though these big firms like Byju's and Academy have also started to purchase the smaller brands, like Byju's purchased Akash, and like an Academy is also purchasing some new smaller firms, right? So that thing is like prevailing in the market, but the competition is, I would say, much more healthier as compared to the other monopoly and the duopoly stage, right? So like if we talk about like some kind of other businesses, like if people can suggest like apart from telecom, right? So like any other businesses in which you feel it's like difficult to obtain license, in which there is monopoly or a duopoly. Any other businesses that you can think of? Earlier, EV was something that was a duopoly or a monopoly stage or a kind of an oligopoly stage, like 10 years down the line. But now people have come into place. Now, like the different companies have started to manufacture their EVs as well. So it's the healthy competition space now. Railway to some extent can be because like everything is a PSU, right? Your aircon, your rail. So like everything, the government has a majority of the stake, right? So that can be kind of a thing. Google can be a one thing. It can be a one thing. Like Google, Amazon, they have their own leaks. So like one is offering some website services because Amazon is basically an AWS service, right? Apple is something again we can call it. So Apple in terms of the, I would say the luxury segment, right? In terms of luxury segment, like it has the monopoly. So up to a specific segment of people because it caters towards the luxury segment, the upper middle class people only, right? Intel in terms of chips, right? So like if someone wants to enter in terms of chips, so like Nvidia, Intel is something like those who are working into like this market. Though we have some Chinese companies also like towards that tech side and the side for AI. You have Alibaba, you have Tencent, right? So a couple of good companies like who are trying to acquire the smaller companies in the market as well. So if your company has a good regulatory effect and it's difficult in your industry to obtain that license, right? So it can be good to have that industry into your portfolio, but also look into the profitability and the cash flows after that, because telecom business is something that might not give you huge returns over long-term basis. And because that industry is something which is, I would say, debt oriented, and they tend to take a lot of loans to expand their activities, though they might be into the profitability stage, but the cash flows of these companies are usually negative. And like even if the cash flows of these companies are positive, they are positive up to a certain extent only. So the cash flows are very volatile, or the cash flows are not, I would say, consistent on a positive note. So these companies like the telecom business, like most of these companies have the profitable, they are profitable on the basis of the P&L statement, but they have negative cash flows. And that is why I always stress people to focus upon the cash flows more and less upon the profitability. And the reason for the same was cited in the previous session when I was just citing again and again that why the cash flows are important. Okay, because and why these cash flows are negative? Because the capex of these companies is very high. Their capital expenditure of the companies is very high. Their working capital needs is very high. They have to install towers. They have to lay down lines, wiring, like all over the globe, India. So uski wajah se their capex requirement is very high and the cash flow turns out to be negative. So that is the most important reason. If someone asks you that why the telecom businesses have the free cash flows are negative and the profitability being positive. So the only reason is they have their huge capex and working capital needs. Correct? They have to lay down towers. They have to lay down wiring. So all that involves the cost for crores and crores, millions and millions of dollars. And that makes the cash flows as negative. So even if the company has a negative cash flows, you need to understand the business, that why the company has negative cash flows. Right? In case of telecom business, people still purchase these telecom companies like Airtel or the Vodafone India, even having those negative cash flows, right? But the thing is, what happens, they understand the business model, that why these companies are having those negative cash flows. If a reason is justified, the company can the cash flow is negative, and why the cash flow is negative, if those kinds of reasons are justified, it's fine, right? Then you might look some other metrics in case of these telecom businesses. Because in case of these telecom businesses, cash flow is not a good metric to look after for the purpose of investing. You guys can look into some other metrics, right? It can be EBITDA. It's also looked on the basis of the ARPUs, the average revenue per user, right? A very popular metric being used in telecom industries, ARPUs, the average revenue per user. So all these metrics are something which are used. I'll be talking about this telecom industry specifically as well sometime later, but that is your regulatory effect. Nestle, in terms of a few of the products, Rahul, yeah, in terms of Maggi, in terms of Nescafe, right? It's having a monopoly. Then you have the third one as your distribution network, correct? So if we talk about distribution network, we usually mean is if the company is having a good distribution network, like all over India. So for example, if a company is orienting towards Indian markets only, the company should have a good distribution network, because if we see in most of the villages or areas, it's quite difficult to establish a distribution network, correct? Because your trucks, your vans, and जो भी तुम्हारे tempos होते हैं, right? It's very difficult to reach there because the roads are not developed, right? They have very narrow roads, and the only mode of communication is through a bullock cart, right? Or by the mode of walking per se, right? Because the roads aren't developed and those villages are too far away in the backward areas, right? It's very difficult to reach in there, right? And even if you might have seen these companies like HUL or ITC, they come up with their small tetra packs or this, or they come up with the small sachets also, right? A shampoo ka sachet for 2 rupees, a shampoo ka sachet for 1 rupee, right? They might have a smaller version of their products, like which they tend to sell off in those markets, because people in the rural areas or which are unreachable by the usual mode of transportation, they do not buy the things in bulk. They won't buy a full pack of Nescafe, right? Or a Nescafe gold bottle that might cost you like 400, 500 rupees or 700 rupees, depending upon the size. So person in that segment of the population or that area might not buy a Nescafe Gold, right? That person might be more interested to buying in sachets. So Nescafe ke like 1 rupees and 2 rupees ke aate hain sachets, correct? And similarly, the person would not be buying the whole pack of Maggi, right? The big jumbo pack of Maggi. That person might be buying a 10 rupees packet of Maggi, like in which you have just one piece of Maggi. And same for shampoos and all, right? So no one would be purchasing that big bottle of shampoo, right? Because that will cost like 1,000, 1,200 rupees, that big, huge bottle of shampoo of Pantene or like Head and Shoulders. They purchase buying more of small sachets, right? And small packs of like 2 rupees ka or like 1 rupee ka, like jo shampoo ke sachets aate hain, correct? So they try to customize their products and they try to send those products or deliver those products to those areas. So for that purpose, you need to have a distribution network, right? So like Varun Beverages has a good distribution network. So HUL has a good distribution network, because we might see PepsiCo bottles, right? So they are available everywhere. Pepsi आपको हर जगह मिल जाएगी. Coca-Cola नहीं मिलेगी हर जगह. Right? You might have seen this thing. Like Coca-Cola might not be available like to all those things. Like you might be visiting some places like where you travel through your highways and stuff, right? And you have those local dhabas on the place. So Pepsi सब रखते हैं, right? Because they have those tie-ups. That Varun Beverages is the official partner of like selling the bottled of Pepsi in India. उसका नेटवर्क इतना स्ट्रांग है, तुम कहीं भी जाओ like Pepsi मिल जाएगी. Even like it has also partnered with the different, I would say, like QSR spaces also. Like if you go to Pizza Hut or Domino's, like they have a tie with Pepsi and not Coca-Cola. Right? So Pepsi Coca distribution network is too strong. And even like if you talk in case of HUL HUL or the ITC or Nestle, they have their network in terms of like selling of shampoos, Maggie especially. Maggie सबको पता है. Like be it a person belonging to a rural segment or to those villages like which are too underdeveloped. ठीक है, जहाँ पे light भी नहीं आती ढंग से. People know about Maggie, right? So they have the distribution network too strong. They have their own vans and trucks and bullock carts. They have like collaborated or like they have contracted with those village के local agents and local people. कि आपको like इस point तक आना है, इस border पर आना है. Like we'll be just offloading our products from our trains or our vehicles, and then you can just take it to like through your bullock carts or so. So वो contracts that those people have established. Colgate is one something. Colgate, Pepsodent, right? Because people know like more about Colgate than Pepsodent, right? In like most of the places. And Colgate का like छोटे वाले जो tube आती है, right? The 10 rupees tube. It's a very common tube. Like so, like even people like who are the rich class, right? They tend to use that for traveling purposes. Small that toothpaste, they tend to use it. Like उनके बैग में होता ही है, right? कि कहीं रोड पे like brush करना पड़ जाए, क्या हो जाए, right? So all these things they tend to keep it, and that's a very good like marketing techniques in terms of traveling purposes also, right? When someone travels, they tend to go to a store and say कि छोटा वाला toothpaste दो भैया, right? Because they won't take it the big pack, correct? So like उसका भी demand है. Your Maggie or small coffee or toothpaste. Right? So all these smaller things, small packs of shampoo, small pack, your PepsiCo, of course, right? And again, all these you might have not seen. Article to like in the cities, the glass bottles have stopped to operate. Like you might like still have those like in some kind of local stores. Right? Like pehle, like you used to have those the glass bottles of PepsiCo or Fanta or Coca-Cola. Right? Now the quantum of those glass bottles have been reduced. You might just found those bottles in some like very local stores. Right? But if you go to villages, the glass bottles are still used. The small glass bottles. Right? So that is something that they're working upon still. So they have stopped the distribution in cities, but they have increased the distribution into like those segment of population. A way of marketing, because यहाँ से उनको like उससे पैसा नहीं मिल रहा था, right? And they got that money from glass bottles from those segment of population in the rural areas. So that is one thing. Now you have the lower operating cost. If someone is able to operate their business at a very low cost, and like here we talk about the concept of economies of scale, right? And what is economies of scale? As you tend to increase your production, the per unit cost of each unit that you tend to manufacture, it comes down. मतलब तो जितना तो मैन्युफैक्चर कर रहे हो, so on a long term basis, to an intermediate to a long term basis, the per unit cost of the production might come down. So for example, if I am producing just one packet of Maggie, so that might cost me a lot. But if I am producing lakhs and lakhs packs of Maggie, the cost of Maggie shall come down to 10 rupees itself, right? That why are they able to sell that small pack of Maggie like this for 10 rupees of, or like 20 rupees per se, right? Initially, when they used to like manufacture Maggie, and even that one piece of Maggie used to cost them 100 rupees. All that manufacturing activities, all the research and development cost, uska packet banane ki cost, uska masala banane ki cost, right? But once they started to manufacture in millions and billions of quantity, the cost came down, right? And the same thing is like you also I don't know, like if you have witnessed that or something, if you try to purchase something in bulk, right, the cost of that product comes down, right? And like since you are the college students, right, there's something that like mostly the colleges tend to arrange. They tend to arrange something for their college societies, right? They tend to print their t-shirts. They tend to print mugs for them, right? अगर तुम एक mug बनाओगे and like अगर तुम one t-shirt खरीदोगे, so that might cost you like 500 rupees per t-shirt or like 200 rupees per mug. But if you manufacture that in bulk, you say that we'll be selling it off to hundreds and hundreds of people like in our club or society. That 500 rupees per t-shirt ka cost, it comes down to 250 rupees or 300 rupees because that you are ordering in bulk, right? And that's the concept of economies of scale in real life. And that happens like in all the businesses, right? The people tend to print their banners, their hoardings and pamphlets, like, right? So like if you're printing like one pamphlet and like one hoarding, that shall cost you a lot, right? But अगर तुम bulk में कर रहे हो, the price of that will come down. So that's the concept of your lower operating cost. A company which operates on a lower operating cost, that's a good one. And mostly all the I would say the large cap companies and the mid cap companies work upon the principle of lower operating cost because they have established themselves. Not all the small cap companies, but all the large cap companies and majority of the mid cap companies work upon this principle. Then you have the switching cost. Now it's a very interesting one. So your switching cost is something when it's very difficult to switch your brand. Right. So for example, if you are using a Colgate, a toothpaste, right, it might be very difficult for you to switch to Patanjali. You might use Pepsodent, but it might be like very difficult for you to switch to Patanjali. Right. So if someone is too much oriented toward that particular brand, and it's very difficult for that person to switch to the other brand, like maybe because of taste or ingredients. So that becomes a switching cost. In case of toothpaste, the switching cost is high, but not very high. Because what happens, like people might switch from Colgate to Pepsodent and Pepsodent to Colgate. Right? Because these are the closer and similar brands. But they might not switch to Patanjali, right, very easily. Right? So that is something. But the switching cost is still high, but not too high. In terms of your Pepsi and Coca-Cola, like is one such thing, right? And nowadays, like Thumbs Up has also come into place. The brand एक का है मतलब के ऊपर at the top, but if we talk about like drink specific, ठीक है, so Pepsi, Coca-Cola, like people are like ready to switch, ठीक है. One of the most popular costs, like one of the most popular switching metric, like which happens in real life is like when you tend to open a bank account somewhere. For example, if you open a bank account in HDFC Bank, तुम्हारा saving account वहाँ पे है, like we're getting that saving account interest that's like 2 to 3% per se and doesn't beat inflation also, ठीक है, but तुम्हारा bank account वहाँ पे है. All those kinds of your security management services, your portfolio is being maintained by HDFC Bank. तुम्हारा fund manager HDFC Bank का है, correct? So you are taking all those banking services, be it fund managing, be it FDs, be it saving account from HDFC Bank, right? But if you are not happy with like one of the services of HDFC Bank, is it easier for you to switch to some other bank? No, right? Because हमारा saving account HDFC में है, you have your FDs in HDFC, you have your portfolio in the HDFC. It's very difficult or too difficult for you to switch all those services from HDFC Bank to ICICI Bank, for example. Correct? It might take paperwork. It might take a lot of time. अब तुम खुद ही बोल दोगे at the end, एक गलती हो गई HDFC बैंक से, like हमको अच्छा नहीं लगा, कुछ नहीं होता, ठीक है? So like let's keep on going. Because like no one has time to switch from like one bank to another. बार बार. You have your customer relationship there. You have your bank account there. You are getting multiple services from that particular bank. People are busy into multiple things. They don't have time to switch from one bank to other. Correct? It might take times and times for them to switch from one bank to other. So in case of your switching cost, it's very high in case of banking system. The one bank you trust upon, the one bank that you're getting all the services from, you tend to become lazy and lethargic to switch from that bank to some other bank. Right? Because फालतू time किसी के पास नहीं है. Right? So that's the major thing. Also in case of your tobacco industries, ITC, the people who smoke here, right on the call, right? So smoking is injurious to health, right? So one disclaimer to everyone here, right? But all of the people like who tend to smoke, ठीक है? तो वो switching cost is very, I would say, in case of smoking, if you belong to like one ITC brand only, right? Because I know many people like who belong to like one specific brand and they want to smoke from that brand only, correct? As if कितना भी price बढ़ा दो उस brand का, like people won't be switching from that brand, right? Because they are like habitual to smoke. And the same goes for drinking, right? They want one specific brand of drinking, right? So that's a switching cost mode. So this business, you find the switching cost is very high as banking systems, the private banks per se, right? Then the private banks are good to go because the switching cost is very high in terms of your private banks. If we talk about engagement, yeah, so Royal Stag, Black Dog. So we have one hardcore drinker in the call, right, Mr. Devesh? So, yeah, I understand that you are a good hardcore drinker. You drink brands like Royal Stag, Black Dog, JD, and Almog. That's completely fine. I'll be more than happy to deliver that to your home as well. Okay, just send me your address. Yeah, just kidding. Okay. So, nice. So, like, it's very difficult for people to switch from these brands to the other. Okay. So like that is the thing. Like, as if we trust you, Devesh, right? So, the thing is engagement. Okay. So now the thing comes for engagement. Okay. So the thing is, so like in terms of the switching cost, man, I just remembered a joke as well. So like he's talking about like different brands. I don't know, like somewhere like I saw on some Insta reel or something. Right, some faculty was asking someone, I don't know, like what he was asking. Like he was asking something कि एक क्वार्टर में कितना होता है, like something XYZ stuff. हाँ, like कुछ तो ऐसा real था. So the students they like interpreted the quarter as a glass का quarter, right? हाँ, that 20 ml, right? That's something like, but he was asking from a mathematical perspective, right? So these kinds of reels tend to get posted online. Yeah, yeah, I understand, I understand. So we have two people here, like Mr. Vikram and Divesh. So no worries in that. So anyone else can put in their points. Correct, correct, correct. Okay. So like in terms of, I would say यार थोड़ा यार doubt भी पूछ लो यार कि modes के बारे में. And that is an engagement, right? The next mode. If the people are interested out of a certain topic, right, they tend to get engaged, right? And they tend to get common people like around you. So that switching costs, say like we are like landing down to engagement, and alcohol is one such engagement, right? On which the people have started to comment in the chat box, right? So engagement is something that interests you a lot, right? Like किसी चीज में तुमको like बहुत interest आता है, correct? So if a company is having that engagement with the population, you might have heard, you might have watched like these kinds of advertisements of Royal Stag Mega Music. Like they tend to promote some music, right? But their main agenda is to promote their drink, their alcoholic drink. So that we call as a case of a surrogate advertising, right? Because in India, you aren't allowed to legally promote a cigarette brand or a drink brand. So all these brands, they tend to partner with people like Shah Rukh Khan, Akshay Kumar, right? And they tend to promote something indirectly. They tend to promote a music series, right? But at the back end, they're talking about the drink itself because people know about that brand, कि वो brand तो वो drinking का ही है, right? But they're promoting some Royal Stag Mega Music, right? Some music series they are promoting, some movie they are promoting. So that's called as a surrogate advertising, where you're showing as if you're promoting something else, but the back end intention is something like which they want people to know, right? So a brand like which is able to get that engagement. So you have that Maggie ka ad, right? You have that Nescafe ka ad, right? And like earlier, like 4 year, 5 year, like so before that COVID-19 pandemic, we had that Maggie fiasco, right? With all that, the content for lead was found in Maggie, and the Maggie got banned for like 6 to 7 months, right? But still, people were purchasing Maggie and eating Maggie because that's an engagement effect. That's a switching cost. उनको पता है कि lead Maggie में हो सकती है, right? But still, they were eating that, and they were trying to purchase that from some local stores, right? जहाँ पे like Maggie was available because people were still offloading Maggie, right? So that is one thing. Actually, I watched one person can drink, not clearly switches, right? And men will be men ad. Yeah, so nice example, Shruti, right? So that is something, right? So again, that is one thing. So ये सब modes हैं, right? I won't be just like touching upon these modes. People have already started to talk about alcohol, cigarettes, and men will be men. So we can just like keep the discussion towards academic side. Okay, so modes is just like this part. Okay, you might have some more modes, like any kind of different modes you guys can suggest me. Apart from the network mode and regulatory licenses, distribution network, lower operating cost, switching cost, engagement, any other kind of mode that you can suggest me. I like any question in the chat box. I like any question anyone wants to ask. किसी का कोई भी question है? Any question, anyone? Your selling strategy would come under your the network effect itself. Your selling, marketing, everything. Any question, anyone? These are the modes used to analyze the company. Correct, correct. Because apart from those financial metrics, it's also important to analyze the company from a different ideology or from a different perspective also. कि ऐसा क्या है इस company में, right? So what is there in your in that particular company which the other people don't have it, right? So it's a fight for moats in the market. If no questions, see, there is something called as your DuPont analysis. And DuPont analysis is a topic which the college people might teach you as well. But the thing is, you need to understand this from a different perspective. Okay? So what happens is this DuPont is majorly used, okay, in the practical world also. The equity research analysts or the people who are preparing the financial model or doing valuation of companies are using this DuPont analysis. So what happens in DuPont analysis, as we talked about in the previous sessions also, the return on equity is one of the most important metrics to understand the financials of the company. First, we do financial analysis, and then we go for modes. There is no specific order, Nitesh. You first go for modes of financial analysis. It's being done like hand in hand. So it's a complementary approach. They're not mutually exhaustive, but exclusive, right? They have to be in line together. So like both the things are done, I would say, on a parallel basis. Okay. So this ROE, which talks about the final return, which the equity shareholders get in the company. This ROE is broken down into three things. One is your net profit margin, which is your net profit in the numerator and sales in the denominator. You have the return on assets, which talks about sales in the numerator and assets in your denominator. Okay. And your financial leverage, which talks about assets by equity. It means how many assets are being funded by equity, ideally. If this ratio is low, it means equity is high, right? If this ratio is low, it means equity is less and assets are more. It means that more assets are getting funded by debt and not equity. So make note of this point. This third component is very important and the trickier one, financial leverage. It talks about assets in the numerator and equity in your denominator. If this ratio is high, so mathematically it means your denominator is low. It means equity component in the business is low and the assets is high. It means the majority of the assets are getting funded by debt and not by equity. The equity component in the business is low. Okay. So if we talk about ROE, we talk about the simple ratio is the net profit margin. We know the profit should be as high as possible. The company should be able to make more profit on the basis of sale it is being able to make in the market. Correct? So on the basis of these sales, the company should be able to command a higher price. All right. And the return on assets is nothing but your sales and assets is nothing but how many sales the company is able to make on the basis of the assets being deployed. So for example, if I purchase some plant and machinery, right, I am trying to manufacture some goods using that plant and machinery. So ultimately, when I am manufacturing those goods and my final product is ready, I'm selling that product in the market, right? So indirectly, that machinery is helping me to sell off those goods and services in the market. So ultimately, I want this return on assets should be as high as possible. That is, I want by deploying a smaller quantity of machinery or by deploying a less amount of machinery, I can able to generate more output. Correct? And that will save my cost also. अगर मैं कम मशीनरी को कम फिक्स्ड कैपिटल यूज करके इफ आई कैन प्रोड्यूस मोर इन्वेंट्री I can sell more products, so that will reduce my cost also, be it my fixed cost or variable cost. Fixed cost in terms of machinery or the variable cost in terms of like when the machinery get run, because the machinery chalegi, you might be having those electricity expenses, the lighting expenses. Jitni zyada machinery utna hi kharcha hai. So if I can deploy less machinery and produce more volume out of that, again my return on assets would be higher. So ultimately that's my main goal. So when will the ROE would be higher? So now the question that comes into place, that when will the ROE would be higher? Because we want the net profit margin to be as high for the company. We want the return on assets should be as high for the company. Correct? But we want the financial leverage to be low, because ultimately we want the assets not to be funded by a higher amount of debt, but to be funded more from equity and cash reserves. Correct? Because higher financial leverage, though it is not always bad, I've told also, okay, debt to equity, a higher debt to equity is not always bad. There are certain reasons which compensates a higher debt to equity also. I've talked about that in my modules and last week a live session. So please watch that. But ideally, in a layman scenario, the return on equity will be higher when your net profit margin would be higher, when your return on assets would be higher, and when your financial leverage would be higher. And we do not want higher financial leverage. If that higher financial leverage is justified, it is fine. But if that higher financial leverage is not justified, even a higher ROE is not good. A very popular interview question. They tend to ask you, they won't ask you that what is DuPont analysis. Everyone knows that like what's DuPont. But trying to break down the ROE into the net profit margin, the return on assets and financial leverage. But they will indirectly ask you, they'll ask you that what impacts your ROE? What impacts your ROE? And then people will think, sir, investments, sir, profits, sir, this and this. They won't give a clear-cut answer. But if someone asks them that what is DuPont analysis, they know everything. So they will ask you in a tricky way. And here what differentiates a successful candidate from an unsuccessful one? Usko pata hai, the ROE is getting affected by, because it's the formula for the ROE. See, you have this formula, right? And if you just try to decode this formula mathematically, sales will cancel out with sales, assets will cancel out with assets, and your net profit and equity will be left. And that's the profit for ROE. We're trying to derive the formula for ROE or that component of ROE from the net profit margin ka formula, return on assets ka formula, and financial leverage ka formula. Correct? So the ROE is being affected by, the answer to that interview question should be, your ROE is being affected by the net profit margin, the return on assets, sorry, and the financial leverage. But here we need to understand the ROE is higher because of higher net profit margin, higher return on assets, and higher financial leverage. So that if your ROE, just make a note of this point, if your ROE is higher on account of the net profit margin and return on assets, right, the magnitude of these two ratios is higher. It's a good ROE. But if your ROE is higher only because of financial leverage, because here we have two positive components and one negative component. And even that higher negative component, which is bad for the company, will increase the ROE. So if the ROE is higher only because of financial leverage, I tend to repeat this point again and again, what the practical point bata raha hu, which your faculties won't even tell you. If your ROE is higher because of financial leverage only and not because of net profit margin and return on assets, assuming your net profit margin is negative, it is very low. The return on assets is very low, like closer to zero, but the financial leverage is 100%. Your ROE would be 100%. And that's a false signal. Agreeing with me? Yes or no? If your net profit margin and return on assets is too low, like closer to 1%, 2%, or zero, and the financial leverage is 100%, your ROE will become 100%. And that is wrong. So here you need to see your ROE. Whenever you are calculating ROE, you need to see what is the net profit margin, what is the return on assets. If all these components are zero or negative, this financial leverage will be used in this equation. And if that becomes 200%, your ROE is 200%. You will say ROE to be 200%, like itni achhi company hai, right? So this thing you need to understand. So that's the decode of DuPont analysis. I guess like you learned something new, right? While decoding this. Yes, debt being very high. Even a higher debt to equity is very good. I've told multiple times, but that higher debt to equity must be justified. Till the point of time, I've talked about that in detail. So I'll repeat that one point as well. Till the point of time, your cost of debt is less than cost of equity. Till the point of time, your cost of debt is less than cost of equity. More debt will increase your EPS. Taking more and more debt will have a magnifying effect upon the EPS of the firm. Till the point of time, your cost of debt is less than cost of equity. Taking more and more debt will have a magnifying effect upon the EPS of the firm, the earnings per share of the firm. And we want the EPS to be high because that will ultimately impact your earnings growth ratio, price to earning ratio. Correct? So that is one thing. Agar samajh nahi aa raha, just go back to my modules. I've talked about that in detail. Okay? So that is one thing. Any questions, anyone? I'll not be taking like the much more time today. Okay? Now it's time for your questions itself. Ask me your concerns, ask me your questions. I have some commitments due today, so I'll be not extending the sessions for 2 hours or like 1.5 hours. Just let me know if any questions. Any question anyone has? EPS is magnifying. Ek second, kahan gaya? EPS magnifying because the debt is used for expansion. Financial leverage high is not good. Financial leverage high in most of the cases is not good, but it can be good also. Higher debt to equity can be good also. Right? But we have certain conditions in which it can be good. So not to worry about that. I've talked about those certain conditions. Just watch my previous module. On the website itself, so I just go on the website on which you have paid, guys. तो वहां पे just go towards the last module like which was added. So that's the recorded session of our previous version. ठीक है, बाकी पिंग पे just ask me, ठीक है, अगर नहीं आ रहा समझ तो. Yeah, so that, so EPS is magnifying because the debt is used for expansion, right? Because debt क्या होता है ना, debt always has the benefit of of the tax deductibility of interest, right? Interest payment pay, like whatever interest payment that you are paying, it has the benefit of tax deductibility of interest. Ultimately, interest payment करके that profit figure can be affected ideally, right? I can show you this with a practical example. I've discussed that in the modules also. But just make note of one thing. Your cost of debt is nothing but the interest that you are paying on debt. And cost of equity is nothing but the expected return that you will provide to the equity shareholders. So that interest rate that you're paying on the debt should be less. जब तक वो कम है, your EPS of the firm will rise, right? Because ultimately more people shall be like investing into the firm, but debt commitment will be less, but debt burden is less in terms of interest payments. But when you start to pay like more and more of interest payments, your profitability is impacted. The profit of the firm might go down. Your cost of capital, your cost of debt is rising because जितना ज़्यादा तुम interest payment कर रहे हो, that's an expense for you. And if more expenses, then the profit is less. So that's the logic behind it. In most M&A, debt is used to purchase. Yeah, and why debt is used to purchase in case of M&A? So that your EPS can be magnified. And that is why in case of M&A, though I do not belong to that segment of population, but in case of M&A, what happens? When two companies come together and two companies tend to get merged or acquired, right? We always talk about an accretive EPS or a diluting EPS. So what's accretive EPS? When two companies are coming together and their EPS is rising. So that's accretive to the firm. Accretive means बढ़ रहा EPS. It's positive for the firm. And if both the companies are coming together and their combined EPS is low as compared to those individual companies, so that's a dilutive EPS. It means the EPS is coming down. And that is why debt is used to fund those expenditures and the impact is judged on the basis of EPS. Okay. If the company issue all equity, they're paying taxes more, but if they issue debt, they pay less tax, right? Because the profit is also less now. Take the interest payment there, the profit automatically come ho jayega. Where would we start watching these videos? Okay, you have the access to the modules. So like it's for everyone. You have the access to modules on the website. Just start watching from the very first module. So they are like you guys can watch the videos and please watch them order wise. All the videos are, I would say, itself order wise. Okay, so binge watch much karna and start the videos from the very scratch. Any questions, anyone? Any further questions anyone is having? If no further questions, then we can end the session for today and we'll get back tomorrow. LBO model सीखना है, yeah, LBO model सीखना है तो modules में है, ठीक है, and that's a very complex part. तो उसके लिए first you need to know about financial modeling. तो जब financial modeling अच्छे से सीख जाओगे, so that LBO model will come into place. I'll share a few of the links to you also personally for the LBO model. ठीक है, not to worry. Link for the website. Okay, the website on which you paid yesterday, so that itself is the link. I will just share the link once again, not to worry. I have a query regarding the Excel course. Should I ping you privately or here? Regarding any Excel course, you can ping me on WhatsApp, okay? But just ping me on the other number, okay? I'll get back to you. Okay, guys, chalo. See you then. I'll just see you next week. Okay? Okay then. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.